Good morning. No matter who you are or where you are in your spiritual journey, you are celebrated here. And that's true for those of you who are joining us online. I'm glad you're here. Beautiful day out there. So we begin this gathering in silence, and if it helps you to close your eyes to do that, you know your shoes don't match. She's wearing a boot. Have you had surgery? Huh? Have you had surgery on your foot? You kicked somebody. That would do it. Okay. Well, that ruined the silence, didn't it? So let's try. Grace be in our heads and in our thinking. Grace be in our eyes and in our seeing. Grace be in our ears and in our hearing. Grace be in my mouth and in my speaking. Grace be in our hearts and in our understanding. And may grace be at our ends and at our departing. And may the power of new life work on all that we are and all that we do. And may we have the eyes to see and the courage to walk the way of patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. Amen. You know, these slides that you see, these presentation slides that you see, are available on the Ordinary Life website every Tuesday. So if there's something that you see here that you like, you can go on the website and get those, copy them, and use them for your own purpose, if you like. So let's jump in. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. You know, the Lord's Prayer begins with a word that our culture and country desperately need to hear in a way that transforms how we think and how we live. There are some words attributed to the Buddha, and for those of you who are interested in history of religion things, there is even more difficulty for Buddhist scholars to attribute to Buddha what Buddha might have actually said than there is to attribute to what Jesus said. So you see these memes showing up all the time about on coffee cups and other things about a saying from Buddha. This one has got a long lineage, and it's worth knowing. It is the thought manifest as the word manifests as the deed develops into habit, and habit hardens into character. So watch the thought and its ways with care, and let it spring from love, born out of concern for all beings. You might add that to you might do that. So the Lord's Prayer begins with this word. And from both a personal and prophetic point of view, we need to inhabit this word and allow this word to inhabit us. Because the words them and the other are in the process of destroying us. This culture as well as cultures around the world. When I was writing this, I was reminded that sometime in the late 60s, a young man was brought into the hospital where I was training who had been beaten. He was a victim of gang violence, beaten nearly to death because he was gay. Now, this is in the 60s. And the next week in our interpersonal relationship supervision group, the psychiatrist who was working with us asked us, there were only men in my training group, no women. He said, I want to know how many of you could wake up in the morning and decide to be gay? And of course, no hands went up. And again, remember, this is in the 60s when there was not as much consciousness raised about this issue as now. And he said, no one does. Sexual orientation is like your hair color or like being left-handed. It is a given. And we should treat people like that. That was a lesson for me. And I think the harshest I ever heard that supervisor deal with any one of my colleagues in that class was we had to present a case every week for supervision. My colleague began by saying, the case in room 312, and the supervisor stopped and said, stop right there. Don't say another word. You get up, you go to room 312, you get to know that person as a person and come back and tell me about them. That was a lesson too. Christian churches, depending on which denomination, have ongoing debates about divisions over issues of full inclusion, what's full inclusion. And I have a colleague in ministry who, when the Methodist Church was going through the split about this very issue, someone in the congregation wanted to engage him in a conversation that was against full inclusion. And my clergy friend said, I am more than happy to discuss this with you. However, before we begin, share with me something about your 3 closest homosexual friends, male or female. End of discussion. As you likely know, I am of the opinion, we always love to think we're right, don't we? But anyway, I am of the opinion that many of our religious difficulties result out of biblical and religious illiteracy. Did you know that there are more Hindu temples in the United States than any place outside of India? Did you know that there are 17 Hindu temples in Harris County? And I doubt that many people in Harris County could tell you virtually anything about Hinduism or about the sacred scriptures of that religion. I mentioned that I am heartsick to see what our state of Texas, at least what's coming out of Austin, is saying about Muslims. And I want to ask Greg Abbott to tell me what his 4 closest Muslim friends think about the policies that he is proposing or how he explains himself to them. My hunch is that most people cannot tell you the 5 pillars of Islam or the 4 noble truths of Buddhism. I know all you all can do that, so. Just to refresh your memory, the Hindu scriptures, which span, they're older than our scriptures, they span 3,500 years of writing, include the Vedas, the Upanishads, the epics. One of the key texts, of course, is the Bhagavad Gita, the Ramayana. This is interesting to me. The 5 pillars of Islam are affirmation of faith in one God, which Jews and Christians affirm. The requirement to pray 5 times a day, which would not hurt any of us to do. Fasting during Ramadan. You might have noticed that Ramadan and Ash Wednesday began on the same day this year. So we also have this tradition of fasting and doing that. Obligatory giving, not just if you'd like to give to charity, you can. Muslims are obligated to do this. And one of the benefits of having really good Muslim friends is when you go to dinner with them, they'll pay. Usually. And of course, a pilgrimage to Mecca, if that's possible. And that's very at the heart of the Christian religion too. The Jewish religion started with pilgrimages to Jerusalem. There's a great similarity between the two religions. And the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism are life is suffering. Suffering is caused by attachments. It's possible to find an end to suffering by dealing with attachments, and you do that by following the Eightfold Path. Which, if you did that, that could be your daily spiritual practice. It'll take you home to do that. It's appalling to me that white racism is growing in places around the world. And such people are just ignorant of the fact that all human beings started in the same place in Africa. And skin color is the result of evolutionary adaptation to differing levels of ultraviolet light in various climates and regions. So one of the things that the three monotheistic religions have done is perfect the art of dividing. All right? We just had that occur a few years ago in the United Methodist Church. The United Methodist Church divided. And there are so many forms of Protestantism, it's just amazing. I get amused by people who are upset about protests that are taking place, and they claim to be Christian. And I wonder, don't they make any connection between Protestant? Oh, well. So, because in spiritual teaching, repetition is not redundant, the Lord's Prayer, and this is from Dominic Crossan, is a prayer from the heart of Judaism on the lips of Christianity for the conscience of the world. It is a radical manifesto and a hymn of hope for all humanity, addressed to all the earth. Now, we have heard, all of us, the Lord's Prayer from a Christian perspective, whatever version of Christianity you inherited or are rebelling from. And we've also heard it from a Western perspective. For example, there are many people who cannot get past the word Father because they feel it's too patriarchal, or worse, because it is their experience in their family of origin with fathers. I understand this. I think most of my work as a psychotherapist and a spiritual director has been with men. And it's been such a privilege to do this. And over the years, I cannot tell you how many men I have had tell me that they have never, ever, ever heard their father say, "I love you." My own father, given the parenting that he had received and the prejudices that he had inherited unquestioned, he was as good a man as I know. But he also worked 6 days a week and was not a major player in my life. And until we become aware and do our own personal work, most people simply repeat the patterns that they have inherited from their family of origin, or as time has passed, from the media. Some of you are old enough to remember the television show, Father Knows Best. So one of the regrets I have in my own life is that I was not as present a factor in my own children's life as I wish now I had been. And my excuses were I was busy getting a doctorate. I was in clinical supervision trying to get licensed. I had a job that required me to work on the weekends. It was just the way things were. When I entered training in the hospital, one of the things that no amount of my academic education prepared me for is the amount and degree of abuse that exists in the American family. That it is in the American family makes sense because statistically that is where we spend most of our time. But that there is so much of it is just absolutely appalling. And then there's this whole issue of patriarchy. It's existed in the human community since 10,000 BC. That's a long time. And one of the things I have had Crossan say in his personal teaching, and it isn't in this book that we're using about the Lord's Prayer. Crossan says, what would the world look like if God ran the show? So the God of Judaism is depicted time and time again as being interested in justice. Not the justice that we think of, but it's the justice that is distributive justice. Crossan writes in this book, a God of justice and righteousness is a God who does what is just by doing what is right, and does what is right by doing what is just. To quote Crossan, when the biblical tradition proclaims that revolutionary vision of distributive justice, it is imagining neither liberal democratic principles nor universal human rights. Instead, its vision derives from the common experience of a well-run home, a household, or family farm. If you walked into one, how would you judge the householder? Are the fields well tended? Are the animals properly provisioned? Are the buildings adequately maintained? Are the children and dependents well fed, clothed, and sheltered? Are the sick given special care? Are responsibilities and returns apportioned fairly? Do all have enough? Especially that. Do all have enough? Or, to the contrary, do some have far too little while others have far too much? So it is that vision of a well-run household, of the home fairly, equitably, and justly administered, that applies to the biblical tradition of God. Now, what I just read from Crossan is not liberalism, it's not socialism, it's not communism. If you need an ism, it's Godism. It's householdism. Or best of all, it is enoughism. The point is that the Lord's Prayer is deeply embedded in the biblical tradition of justice. Its format is deeply embedded in the biblical tradition. Both biblical justice and biblical poetry are recurring emphases in the Lord's Prayer. So, my point is that if we let our own issues about patriarchy or our personal experiences with Father get in the way, we'll miss this entirely. God is not a white, male, punitive being in the sky just waiting for you to get out of line. The first word of the Lord's Prayer is literally Father of us. Now, in understanding the Lord's Prayer this way, I just give you or grant that it comes from a patriarchal society. However, our understanding of that word must not be a projection of our own culture onto that, or a projection of our own personal experience. So the Hebrew people could have picked a lot of words for God. Warrior, king, judge, Lord. Why Father? What was the metaphorical understanding of that word in that culture? John Dominic Crosland has been here. I don't know if any of you ever remember that, but one time he even preached at St. Paul's. He's not a big guy. He's older than I am. He's an amazing human being, incredibly brilliant. And one of the things that I first heard from Crosland that stuck with me is that our tendency is to think that the people who constructed the stories that make up our sacred text wrote them literally, and we're now smart enough to take them symbolically. And Crosland said it is just the other way around. They wrote them symbolically, and we are now stupid enough to take them literally. For example, the Gospel of John begins, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was God." Nobody takes that literally. God is not a word. It's a metaphor. John the Baptist refers to Jesus as the Lamb of God. Mary had a little lamb. That's a joke. It was an attempt at humor. It didn't work. Jesus is not a lamb. It's a metaphor. There is only one word, one term, one title that can ever be used literally about God, and that word is God. And even so, that word is a metaphor. As Barry Taylor has put it so beautifully and accurately, the word God is a blanket we put over the mystery to give it shape. Now, when you see a sign in a public place that says men only, you know what that means. As I said, they'll be on the web. So compare that with the phrase that is in the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. Now, even though the men who wrote that document had their own struggles and conflicts about what that word men meant, we have come to see that it means everyone. So in the Pledge to the Flag, we use the phrase "with liberty and justice for all." So in the Gospel of Luke, a group of Jesus followers, which is explicitly stated to include women, including Jesus' mother, is addressed as brethren. In one translation, in a later version, it is replaced with the word believers. Now, I want to go into it here, but if you were to read Crosland's book on the Lord's Prayer, he goes to great lengths that the word father is a metaphor used to mean one who runs a well-run household for all involved. I'm going to quote him one last time today. To call God Father in heaven is to call God householder of the earth. And that is why Jesus addressed God as Abba, which is daddy, in the Lord's Prayer. Now, in the biblical worldview, the Hebrew Scriptures, there are three groups of people, major groups of people, that are especially defenseless and therefore offered special care if God ran the world. See if these have any relevance to our culture. One group is the poor and the needy in a rich society. The other group is widows and orphans in a patriarchal society. And the other group is resident aliens in a tribal society. So over and over, Jesus drew from his Jewish heritage that living our identity as children of this God We were to act without violence and to act with love. Now, we covered this a few weeks ago when we dealt with Jesus' most radical teaching, in which he said the rain falls on the just and the unjust. Everybody's the same. And so we're to live like this. And when we pray like this, when we pray the Lord's Prayer, we are praying to be empowered to live like this, or we are affirming that this is how we will live. So one of the primary messages of Jesus was to help people recapture the vision and understanding of God as expressed in the prophetic tradition of Judaism. However, he did that in such a way that it provided a gut punch to people who heard him, particularly the religious leaders of his time. Now, the Lord's Prayer, as uttered by Jesus, was actually never probably said by him. It's composed in the Gospel of Matthew. The reason we know this is there's no Lord's Prayer in the earliest Gospel, Mark. There's a shorter version in Luke, which was composed later. And then by the time you get to Matthew, which is decades later, it's more fully developed. So for Jews, the word God was unnameable. You couldn't speak it. Were prohibited from saying it. They used to substitute for God. And in Hebrew, that, if you were to put it into English, the Hebrew letters transliterate to YHWH. In Hebrew, there are no vowels, which is tricky, but you get used to it. So anyway, that word can be pronounced Yahweh, as it sometimes is, or it could be pronounced Jehovah. That's a guess. But when Jews referred to God's name, they were thinking those four letters, but not saying them, because it was prohibited to say them. So what Jesus did was he put the word daddy with that word. Now, for some people, they heard that, and that was liberating, right? Because this one person has put it, Jesus didn't come to change God's mind about us. He came to change our mind about God. And so when Jesus called God unspeakable daddy, some people went, wow. And other people said, we got to kill this guy. So Jesus took this word that was thrown around every day, and he put it together with a word that was considered so sacred that it couldn't be mentioned. Now, Jesus did this a lot. He shocked people out of their usual way of thinking about what was sacred, what was God, what was obligatory, and all that. Now, all of this was already in the Jewish tradition. But for a variety of reasons, it had been lost sight of. Maybe, just maybe, the Jewish people were a lot like people who go to church today. They go to church and they say the prayer, they say the creeds, they sing the hymns, they hear the scriptures, and most of the time they're thinking about what's on TV later today. They're not there. We're not there. I know that doesn't apply to you, but so right now, you and I are involved in a cognitive process. We're dealing with matters of knowing and knowledge. The information I'm teaching is not anything new, but what I'm hoping for is that we see again something we intuitively or traditionally know, and we see it as if for the first time. That's called recognition, recognizing, re-knowing. So, as I said, Jesus was constantly putting things together that were stunning, shocking to hear. So, Jesus teaching, love your neighbor, and everybody says, yeah, we know that. It's in the law. It's in the Jewish law. Love God, love your neighbor. Yeah, sure, but who is my neighbor? And Jesus said, well, It's a Somalian immigrant. Love that neighbor. And then he goes on to say, if you really read the parable of the Good Samaritan correctly, he goes on to say, let that Somalian immigrant love you. Read the parable of the Good Samaritan. That's exactly what it says. It doesn't use the word Somalian. It uses the same thing for that culture. So one of the things it means to be on the wayless way is being open to hearing things we think we know, but we end up hearing them as if for the first time. So the way to the life that Jesus taught is no secret, except for the fact that it consists of truths about ourselves and life that we ourselves keep hidden from ourselves or keep hiding from ourselves. So the way the earliest followers of Jesus spoke of what we call prayer is that they said that prayer is learning to live with mystery and developing the wisdom and skill to befriend paradox. Love the neighbor you never considered to be your neighbor. Paradoxical. And as is true with all things non-dual, this is a delightful mixture of complexity and simplicity. The complexity lies in our willingness and ability to see the very things we hide from ourselves. You know, we live in a very highly addictive culture. I don't know what your pet addictions are. I know mine. In case you haven't discovered Reels on Facebook. Just one more. I just want to watch one more. I love Josh Johnson on Reels, you know. You have to work this out for yourself or with a close spiritual companion. I will just say that I have had teachers of various sorts, both formal and informal, who have tried to get me to see things I didn't want to see. That's been true for me. My hunch is that's probably true for you too. So we must learn what the mystics teach is to practice the presence of God, or to have beginner's mind, to become as children. Tapping into these qualities is what deepens and expands our spiritual experience. Meister Eckhart wrote, "The soul is as young as it was when it was created. Old age concerns only the soul's use of the bodily sense. My soul is as young as it was when it was created, yes, and much younger. I tell you, it would not surprise me if I were younger tomorrow than I am today." And when I first read that in Meister Eckhart, I thought, now that's a worthy life goal. To live in such a way that I would die a very young child. And frequently I am reminded by my life partner that I act like a 3-year-old. So you should keep Sherry in your prayers because she has to live with this 24/7. And frequently when we were out with other people, she gets a comment of, "How do you do this? How do you put up with this?" She's just lucky, what I gotta say. Children are just there. They're just there. Jim Finley, after spending years with Thomas Merton as his spiritual director, wrote Thomas Merton's spiritual biography. Notice the paradoxical title of this spiritual biography. The Palace, Merton's Palace of Nowhere. And it's a small book, hard to get now. I don't know if it's on ebook or not, but it's a beautiful book. And when Finley tells a story that when he got to the last chapter and he wanted to write about non-duality, he found out that he couldn't do it. So he contacted a men who taught him in seminary and said, how do I do this? And his seminary professor said, you can't write about non-duality. You can't communicate non-duality. Non-duality communicates itself. That's why contemplation and meditation are so important in spiritual practice. It's the only way you get an experience of it. Duality is a way of seeing reality as divided into opposing parts, up, down, good, bad, subject, object, sacred, secular, so forth. In dualistic things are separated and usually into rigid categories. Non-duality is a way of seeing reality as fundamentally united. It doesn't deny differences, but it sees them as being interconnected, as arising from one source, as part of a larger whole. It's not everything is the same, but it is, reality is one, though it often appears different. I think the first teaching that I got about non-duality was, consider waves on the ocean. A wave is a separate entity, constantly in motion, can be big waves, small waves, destructive waves, but they're all always part of the bigger whole, the ocean. There is no division between sacred and secular. Now, there are places where we remember that we are in the heart of sacred mystery. And then there are times and places when that is the furthest thing from our mind. But that does not lessen that is still where we are. That makes sense? Okay. My favorite non-dual teaching is one you've heard many times. It's from Meister Eckhart. The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. Now you may be wondering, I hope, what is the practical use of any of this? There is a hymn that we sometimes sing, How Firm a Foundation. And the reason that I rant, gently, I hope, about religious literacy is that the purpose, listen to this very carefully, please. The purpose of religion is to provide us a firm foundation that will enable us to step off of it into the spiritual life. That's what I call being trans-religious. So, my religion enables me to move about in the world freely, but untethered. Because we have under our feet the promise of a tradition that has formed us and the disciplines that can shape our spiritual life. And with these, we are enabled to wander now through the multitude of spiritual traditions, Islam, Sufism, Buddhism, Hinduism, whatever, and go deeper and deeper into them from every direction. Now this year, I will be 89. And I am finding the journey along the Wayless Way to be more exciting and more fascinating and more energizing every step along the way, not less. This is not boring to me because I'm coming to a deeper understanding, and I teach because this is what I wish for others as well. By doing this, we become more, not less, of what we know of our own religious tradition. Now, I think it was Wayne Herbert. If it's not you, I'm going to give you credit for it. And you can go into the afterlife with this on you. I think it was Wayne Herbert who described us as ordinary mystics. So it's the plight of the mystic to enter the universe of sacred mystery alone, where there are no charts, there are no maps. But we are, of course, not alone, because as I learned from our Progoff, this solitary work we cannot do alone. So a good prayer, and that is our topic, might be, may we be led beyond all definitions and restrictions into the heart of the mystery where all there is love. Thomas Merton wrote, "You cannot have social order without saints, mystics, and prophets." The other day, I saw this t-shirt. I think t-shirt ministry is a wonderful ministry. And I firmly believe in it. And this is show you the one that I have been wearing now for almost 2 weeks every day. Sherry says, "You're going to get shot someday." You know that? I wore that every place I've gone for the last 2 weeks. The grocery store, wore it to the barber shop yesterday. I've been reading a book by Walter Brueggemann, and I read Brueggemann. He died last year. Brueggemann is a great Old Testament scholar, and I've been reading Brueggemann because I want to know more and more about, Jesus, the Jewish guy in the prophetic tradition, what was that tradition? You've got a lot of that today about care for the poor and the alien and that sort of thing. And when I read what Brueggemann has written about the ancient Hebrew prophets in light of what is going on right now in our culture, and I have a tendency to despair, Brueggemann's work helps me trust again in possibility. Prophetic utterance, whether from the Jewish prophets, from Jesus, or from prophetic voices of our own time, it takes fear and it turns it into the conviction that not only must the world change, but we have to have something to do with changing it. And it's this kind of faith that takes us from fear to the courage it takes to do God's will of humility, justice, and peace. What can we do about our current situation? Leonardo da Vinci once wrote, "Nothing strengthens authority so much as silence." So protests work. That's one thing. We must refuse to ignore what's going on, and we absolutely must refuse insane washing it. Oh, it's okay. It'll be better. As Callista said at the beginning of a class, one of the most important things that you can do is vote. We're going to vote tomorrow. Now, I cannot tell you who to vote for. Did you all see that piece on Stephen Colbert about Tallarico? That was pretty interesting. He spoke here, that Tallarico fellow. So as we move deeper into the Lord's Prayer, you're going to see that what it's about is it's about living in the present moment in light of the future that we're praying for. And it's about seeing what is obstructing the fullness of justice and peace. It is, if we inhabit it, an empowerment that enables us to stare down the opposition in truth and to offer another way to be more human. And somebody might say, well, how do you do that? How do you lead a group that doesn't want to be led? Well, the message, I think, is to sound the message of Jesus, the prophets, and to do so as non-judgmentally as we can. I like the examples that I offered of my clergy friend who said, tell me about gay people you know, or tell me about Muslims you know. Then we can talk. And it's to do that and refuse to go away. One beautiful example of this is what happened recently in Minneapolis. Now, you may know, or if you don't, I'm going to remind you, that after the murder of George Floyd, it was recognized that there would have been no justice done in that crime had there not been people bearing witness to that crime by recording it on their cell phones. So neighborhoods began to organize, encouraging people to look out for each other and to record instances of injustice, so that when the current anti-immigration movement began using ICE agents, these communities saw that only certain areas in the country were being targeted. Those seen by the administration as opposed to it or him, people in places that had not voted to support the current regime. So they organized and they prepared. And it has been successful. The two murders that took place in Minneapolis that made the news, Renee Nicole Goodman and Alex Pretty, were recorded on multiple devices. It's plain view for anyone who is willing to see that there is a huge gap between what's recorded and what the official statements were. But there's more. The protesters, cautioned and trained not to be provocative, have done even more. And this is reflected in a march that was recorded on video of protesters going to where the ICE agents in Minneapolis are staying and singing to them. Now, I want you to remember, I'm going to show you the video, but I want you to remember two things before watching it. Remember what Crossan said about the Lord's Prayer. The Lord's Prayer is a prayer from the heart of Judaism on the lips of Christianity for the conscience of the world. And it is a radical manifesto and hymn of hope for all humanity in languages addressed to all the earth. So we're going to cut down the lights, and I want you to see this video.
So we're outside the second ICE hotel in downtown Minneapolis, and we're calling these ICE agents to join us with song.
Show us your courage. Leave this behind. It's okay to change your mind, and you can join us. You can join us anytime. I wrote this yesterday, so I stopped going. It's okay to change your mind. Show us your courage. Leave this behind. Leave this behind. Oh, it's okay to change your mind. And you can join us. Join us here anytime. Oh, it's okay to change your mind. Leave us behind. Oh, it's okay to change your mind. And you can join us anytime.
This is the Singing Resistance group in Minneapolis, a self-organized group of people that use song to call out ICE, calling them to leave their jobs, join the common good. More than 1,500 people out here.
It's okay to change your mind. What's your courage? Leave this behind. It's okay to change your mind. You can join us anytime. It's okay to change
state flag. All over Minneapolis for the last 60 days, people have been gathering and finding any possible way to raise their voices. Now calling these ICE agents and anybody who supports these ICE actions that it's okay to change your mind. I tell you, as a pastor in our world, we call that repentance. Come on home.
Folks, that's prayer. That's praying with your feet. No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this: you carry precious cargoes, so watch your step, and we'll see you here next Sunday. Thank you.